okay?
We can see it very clearly. Okay,
Okay,
Professor
great.
John, the time is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And
Thank
thank
you.
you for the invitation. It's a great honor to be here and be able to participate in this very interesting event. So the title of my talk is Human-Centric Artificial Intelligence and Education. So what I'm going to try to do is talk a little bit about how large language models, generative models are impacting or could potentially impact education. And then talk about two aspects that I think are important. One is this human-centric, and the other is measuring educational impact. So these are the sort of parts of the talk. So first to say, AI is clearly a massive impact on education, potentially. The potential of intelligent online tutoring is huge, increasing costs by 70%. So facilitating education in countries that perhaps less well-resourced with teachers and so on. And with the advances in AI, there's the potential for a more personalized approach and so on. But I think we have to be very careful because it can also act as an inhibitor. There is this growing economic importance of AI that may result in increased inequalities, especially if AI instructors exhibit problems related to local culture and student context. The need highly skilled educational professionals could result in increased inequalities. And particularly, I think it's fair to say that we have to be very wary of the technology attempting to control and manipulate learners rather than educate them. I think this is something that's perhaps most important to consider when we're thinking about AI-driven technology. Are we really incorporating into the design of that technology educational thinking, or just computational thinking and the kind of approach that we might have to controlling a factory or some other plant? So LLMs are just upping the game to some extent. They're just more powerful AI systems, and they can clearly impact virtually every field of human endeavor, but obviously among them education. So I think that there are several impacts on education. Of course, the use of LLMs in educational systems, but I think more importantly, we're also seeing a sea change in understanding what education may be required to deliver in terms of skills. So the skills that were difficult to learn may become much easier with LLMs. And actually, we may require different or new skills. So, for example, essay writing, which was perhaps a major concern for training school children and older, has seen a shift from basic writing to more conceptual thinking. Of course, we can use large language models to do much of the sort of front, let's say, creation of sentences and text. What we need to be aware of is what what we are trying to convey and the structure of what we're trying to convey, where we need to be working to form that in the right way. Also, examining needs to be rethought. How to ensure LLMs are not being misused to answer exam questions. One example of an idea of how to do that is to actually start the exam, the exam question, actually present the LLM answer, and the students are asked to critique it and say where it's wrong, what it's done, and correct it in its mistakes. But I think it's really forcing us to rethink many aspects of education, clearly making it easier for students to gain access to insightful but sometimes inaccurate summaries of topics. So there's a lot of potential for them to really learn fast, but most importantly and clearly, it highlights the need for critical thinking as opposed to rote learning. So they can get access to information, but they need to be able to critically assess the quality of that information and understand where it may be misleading, inaccurate, or inappropriate. So the key questions, I think, are how to conceptualize the best approach in general, but in particular in the age of large language models. And secondly, how to measure progress. How are we going to actually measure the impact of different systems on education, on the education advance, let's say. So I'm going to address those two questions in the next parts of my talk. I'm going to talk first about human-centric AI, and I believe that's a very appropriate and interesting way to conceptualize how we approach applying AI in education. And then I will spend some time talking about measuring progress and some work that we've done using two different types of approach. So in AI system design, large AI systems typically developed by computer scientists with a commercial goal in mind, and this is true also of educational systems, of course. The commercial goal typically requires input from users. You know, we need to elicit their preferences, interests, etc. But frequently, this input is extracted implicitly in order not to trouble or alarm the user. So we're sort of working in a covert fashion to gain information from the user. So frequently, the user is actually unaware that they are communicating information to the AI system. And so they are blindsided to the fact that the system could be influencing them. So the approach of human-centric AI is to try to set that straight. So human-centric AI aims to create systems that promote transparent communication in order to empower users, to make them aware of what's happening, in control, and the AI is working for them in a way that they understand, rather than covertly influencing them. So just a sort of an analogy, imagine we have two doctors trying to diagnose a patient. Each has different knowledge and experience. One is more senior and must take ultimate responsibility. When one doctor explains his diagnosis to the other doctor, he or she does not give a readout of his neurons' activations, but rather tries to justify or even persuade rather than explain. So trying to convey the idea behind why this is perhaps the right diagnosis for this patient. So the justification could cite some literature, it could examples of previous patients, highlighting similarities with the current patient. And it's vital that both participants are open in this communication to learning from each other. And note that the goals that they are pursuing should be aligned unless there are other issues that interfere, like proving a point or some sort of personal matters. But so if we now imagine that the junior doctor is an AI system, I think we can think about the way the AI system should be communicating with a human in a way that will enhance the human's ability to do their job and be more creative. So again, we need the communication to happen in order for the AI system now, the junior doctor, to justify, persuade communications. We need to see systems that can generate evidenced arguments supporting their decision. We also need to enable feedback that can be incorporated into the decision-making process. So this provides an example of a human-centric AI system. A doctor's assistant providing an interactive advisory and exploratory service in diagnosis and prognosis of disease, but not, note, a system that does just diagnosis. It's not just saying, this is the diagnosis that I believe. It's saying, this is the diagnosis with this perhaps probability for this reason, and be open to correction or new information that might change that diagnosis. So it's clear from this example, I think, that a human-centric AI system is at its core educational. The system is trying to persuade the doctor by giving an understanding, the senior doctor in this case, an understanding of their insight into the diagnosis. What is the underlying reasoning behind the diagnosis in order to give them a better insight into this disease, and also, of course, be corrected if they're wrong. So generally, I think that we need to think of AI in this context. as being human-centric. The goal of artificial general intelligence, in which AI will become the lead partner in making decisions and in running systems, I think has always been controversial, but I think perhaps it's also ill-conceived. I think we should be thinking about humanity beyond intelligence. We are sensory beings. We experience our environment, and that is something different from mere intelligence, as we are now seeing with the AI systems that are able to do remarkable intelligent computations, but do not experience, unless you are one of the adherents of the idea that ChatGPT experiences, or GPT-3. Our experience is enabled by many intelligent subsystems in our bodies, but even today, there are some replaceable by AI subsystems. So we should rather focus on how AI can further enhance and extend our experience of creativity, rather than attempt to emulate or replace independent intelligence. So from this perspective, again, we come back to this idea that AI should aim to be educational whenever it interacts with humans, increasing their understanding and insight. So that's my kind of conceptualization of how I think we should approach introducing large language models into education, and generally AI into education. But the second part of what I wanted to speak about was, how do we measure whether we're successful or not? Any enterprise that we want to place on a scientific footing, we need to be able to say what our goals are, how we're going to measure success, and so on. And I think this is actually extraordinarily difficult in education. So we need to think carefully about how we can assess progress and agree. So as I say, the complexity of the learning environment, poorly understood dynamics of learning itself make this far from trivial. So I will give two examples of work we have done that has attempted to overcome these difficulties, but it's far from a complete story. I want to emphasize, I think this is really, something that needs to be looked at in very carefully in order to understand better how we can measure. So the first I'm going to look at is a particular sort of interactive system, looking ahead in content understanding, and the way in which we are measuring this impact is through a user study. So it's a user study methodology. And the second is an analysis of engagement with online educational resources. And here we have an offline automatic assessment methodology. So these are just two methodologies. I say this is far from complete, but I'm just trying to give you kind of, an example or two examples that I think illustrate the kind of things we can do, but are far from a complete story of what we should be able to think about doing in terms of measuring educational impact.